I remember the first time I really felt the sense of resentment is when he came home after work and had a new haircut. And I remember at that point, I had just not had my hair done in so long. And I had been trying to get in, and it felt like I had to rearrange the stars to make a hair appointment. And then when I was at the hair appointment, I was just anticipating being called back home because our daughter needed to be fed. I was like, how dare you walk in the house? I was like, you just took the time with no consideration for what was going on at home with me, with no consideration for the fact that we now have a kid. He wasn't really doing anything that different than he always had done. And that just kind of goes back to that experience of I, as the woman, am making all of these adjustments to how I live my life to accommodate another person. Whereas a lot of times our partners sort of just kind of like, keep on, keep it on the way they always have.
Have you ever wondered why the everyday to-do list can feel so heavy? I know I have. So if you have, this episode is for you too. I'm joined by Dr. Morgan Cutlip, psychologist, author, and expert on mental health load in motherhood. We're going to talk about why it's so exhausting, how it affects our relationships, and what we can do to feel more supported and less alone. This is definitely something I know I need more support with. So Morgan, welcome to the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Can you tell me a bit about your own story and what led you to focusing so deeply on marriage, motherhood, and the emotional work that women carry?
I really have been in the field of relationships for a very long time. I think I'm over 20 years now. If I do the math. I used to work alongside my dad. He's in the same profession, and he was sort of creating relationship courses before everybody and their brother had relationship courses or just courses in general. I sort of grew up in the profession of relationships, the self-help world. And I remember it was probably back when I was in college saying to my dad, someday I want to do something to serve women, but I'm not really sure what that looks like. So fast forward many, many years later, and our daughter Effie was born. She's 12 now, which is wild. Motherhood really threw me for a massive loop. I went into motherhood thinking I was going to actually just like crush it. I would be such an incredible mom. I felt really equipped. I was like, I have this education. I have all this know-how. I have great parents. I got this. And I felt completely buried. I felt lost to myself. I felt overwhelmed. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, like I was always falling short. And that really became sort of the heart and the motivation for my first book. But right alongside that experience, I was experiencing a shift in our relationship too, which was I cannot believe how quickly I am starting to resent my husband. We have a great marriage. We love each other very much. And there were some unique circumstances around our relationship at the time. And we got, moved across the country for a new job. And so there were all of these extra things. But it was wild how quickly our relationship just sort of shifted to a place of tension, disconnect, feeling like we were living in separate worlds. I felt a lot of irritation around the fact that it felt like my life changed and his stayed the same. The motivation and the heart for book 2 came from that experience, which is, hey, I specialize in relationships. I know how to manage this stuff. And I'm going through this in my own relationship. And I know this is something that couples everywhere and women everywhere are struggling with.
I think that's what makes you so relatable. When I read your book, as you sort of say there, you've got this history, this experience from working with your dad and kind of being brought up in this environment and feeling like, obviously, with your education and what you do for a living, and you'd been with your husband for quite a while, hadn't you, before you had your first child? But even then, it knocked you sideways, and the kind of mental load and how it changed your relationship really took its toll. And I think for me, that definitely gives all women hope, because if even you kind of struggled with the change, then my God, it's no wonder so many women do find it tough and do find it challenging, because as you say, it does feel like our life changes and theirs doesn't. And I think especially in the early days, that's a lot to manage, and it's hard to stop the resentment creeping in and to know how to navigate that.
I think this is one of the biggest shocks for a lot of women right after they become parents, is just how quickly, like literally overnight, how these responsibilities that we're carrying just explode exponentially. Part of what I try to do in my book is provide some clarity as to why this is. How do we get here? How do we get to a place where our relationship feels all of a sudden so inequitable? And when we look back, we might say, okay, it always sort of was, but we didn't feel the pain of it until all of these new responsibilities that come along with being parents really piles on our plates.
I remember one of the things I found really challenging in the early days was the fact that the baby was kind of felt like my responsibility, in the sense that my husband could go to work and come back when it suited, when he'd finished doing what he was doing. And if that involved stopping at the shops on the journey home, filling up with fuel, that was just his prerogative. He could do that. For me, I was always borrowing somebody else's time to do anything. To go for a lunch with my mum, meet up with some friends, do something, I had to kind of ask permission from my mum or my husband. That's how it felt in the early days, to kind of take that time for myself. And I felt that was really frustrating, and it did kind of put some resentment there, because I felt like, why does that sit with me in the early days of our relationship? And I felt like a real loss of my freedom, and I struggled with that.
When you look at the research, I mean, I struggled with it too, I'll tell you in a second, but when you look at the research on how marriage changes after kids, if specifically for men and women, it looks very different. So for women, the struggle in their relationship after kids is around loss of freedom, exactly like you're saying. And then the mental load, the increase in responsibilities on their plates. For men, what they tend to feel more stress around, it's usually changes in the sexual relationship and increased financial pressure. This research hasn't really been repeated in a while, but I would bet it looks pretty similar. I remember the first time I really felt, and I try to express it not very well, but to my husband, felt this sense of resentment, is when he came home after work and had a new haircut. And I remember at that point, I had just not had my hair done in so long. And I had been trying to get in, and it felt like I had to rearrange the stars. And, I was just anticipating being called back home because our daughter needed to be fed, or she wasn't happy with whoever was watching her. And I was like, how dare you walk in the house? You just took the time with no consideration for what was going on at home with me, with no consideration for the fact that we now have a kid. And in his defense, he wasn't really doing anything that different than he always had done. And that just kind of goes back to that experience of I, as the woman, and it makes sense why, but I'm making all of these adjustments to how I live my life to accommodate another person. Whereas a lot of times our partners sort of just kind of like, keep it on the way they always have. And, my husband, we had to have all these conversations, and he then had to make these adjustments, but it came a little delayed. And I think that delay a lot of times is a great opportunity for a lot of frustration and resentment to really take root.
I think that's pretty common. I think for most people, there's a delay there, isn't there? It takes a little while to kind of make that adjustment for you as a couple, and for them to kind of get the memo that they maybe need to also make some change.
Yes.
On paper, the to-do list might not seem so overwhelming if we were to sort of write it down. The washing, the school runs, the booking the school camps. But for so many mums, it really can feel totally draining. So why is that?
For my book, I did interviews with men and with women. And I also collected just some survey data as well from women. But when I was doing one of my interviews, one of the women said, can you please create a visual of the mental load? I just don't think my husband will get it unless there's a visual. So explaining the question you're asking really came out of trying to unpack why is it that the mental load is so overwhelming when on the surface it seems very simple. Because a lot of times when we try to talk about it with our partners, they'll say things like make a list, or you should make a list and just work through your list, one thing at a time, babe, don't worry, it'll get done, that kind of stuff. And so we end up feeling a little bit ashamed, or, why am I can't handle life? What's wrong with me? Or we just get irritated with them that they don't understand it. The way that I explain what you're asking is that the mental load, to truly understand it, you have to understand that it is made up of 3 different categories of tasks. So if you can visualize 3 circles that overlap like a Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm.
3 tasks are: number 1, the physical tasks. That's what men tend to think the mental load is. I'll mow the lawn, I'll do some laundry, I'll go to the grocery store, I'll, wash the dishes. And they're like, great, I helped out. And we're like, we're still overwhelmed. That's not cutting it. The second is the mental. That's basically making the lists or thinking through the steps involved in taking care of something. And then the third category is the emotional labor. This is where our partners really they struggle to grasp this piece. And the emotional labor is, this is kind of a mouthful, but it can be clarifying. It's the regular and ongoing cause and effect calculations we're making on behalf of the people we love to try to maximize positive experiences. So the emotional labor is with us all of the time. Can be working full-time, part-time, just living our life, and we're whiplashed back into the mental load because of the emotional labor. Feels like the stakes are really high because this stuff feels major. It feels life-changing, these decisions we make on behalf of the people we love. And it just takes up a lot of energy and worry. Here's what we need to understand. At the intersection of these 3 circles is something I call the triple threat. And when it comes to home and family life, most of the tasks in the mental load, most of the things we're doing on our list require energy, effort, thought, and heart from all 3 categories. So if you look at a to-do list and you look at one item, make dinner, you can unpack it to see, okay, well, there's physical effort that's required, chopping and cooking. There's the mental effort, making the list. What am I going to do? I got a missing ingredient. How do I replace that? What recipe should I cook? And then there's the emotional. How do I feed everybody something nutritious that everybody likes, that meets their dietary requirements, that makes sure I'm not fighting about somebody wanting a bar at bedtime? It unpacks to include all this effort. And that is why a to-do list is not just a list of physical tasks. And that's why it's often so overwhelming.
That's such a beautiful visual you give there and way of explaining it. Because you're right. It is, for me anyway, I find more the actual kind of emotional and the mental part are the bits that almost drain me more, because the emotional part is obviously that love for my children, that I would be wanting to feed them that nutritious meal, something that's beneficial to them all. And if I'm not achieving that, then that can be a real sort of pull on my heartstrings and weigh on me. And then the kind of mental load, I find there's so many things you're kind of juggling at once in your head. And it's not really having the time to even do that, to have those thought processes, because with managing children, there's a lot of chaos and a lot of noise and a lot of stuff going on. And I spend half my time thinking, if I could just grab 10 minutes to think that through, maybe I'd feel better about what I need to do. But chances are, every time I have a thought, somebody needs something from me. I hear mummy, mummy all the time. The kids break into a fight. Somebody needs to go to the toilet. The doorbell goes. And it's that insane level of interruption that leads me to feeling really overstimulated and really overwhelmed at times.
I think every woman listening to this is nodding their head as you're talking, because that's so real. Our kids are older, and I still will sometimes have these moments of feeling like, how come I just cannot complete the simplest task? Because there are constant interruptions. And then you get that moment, you're like, oh my gosh, do I take a break or do I knock some things out? And I remember having a conversation, I think I've posted about this in the past, but a conversation with my husband where I said, part of the frustration sometimes, a lot of times, like in my motherhood experience, has been around the fact that I really crave productivity. I really crave knocking things off my list. And that feels hard. And I think you need to understand that, my life has changed in such a way that even being productive in the simplest of ways can be very challenging sometimes. And so we're going to have to come up with a way for me to carve out uninterrupted time when you're around to manage all the requests and the potties and the baths and the snacks and all the things, so that I can take care of what I got to take care of. Because some things are on my, I'm not handing off that part of the mental load, but I do need the space to get it done. And so I think it's important that if you're a woman, both of my books sort of feed into each other, because really managing the mental load for a lot of women will also require getting comfortable asking for what we need and asserting ourselves. And if you're not comfortable with that, my first book will help you. But, women really have to step into a place where we become better advocates for ourselves and speaking up with our partners and making sure that we ask for what we need, because things change after motherhood and our needs might get bigger. They might become different, and that's absolutely okay. But if we stuff them down, try to manage it all, try to white knuckle it through our life, we are going to become tense, irritable, and probably pretty resentful in our relationships because it's too much.
So many women say that they have to ask their partner for help, and that can feel really frustrating. So how does that dynamic end up happening, and what can women do to change it?
I'm not against asking, but part of the reason why women get frustrated for having to ask is because it sort of suggests that they're the owner of everything until it's delegated. It feels like I am in a relationship on my own. He's just waiting to be ordered around. And that is not fun for anyone. It sort of turns us into the nagging mother and him into the extra child. It's not a sexy dynamic by any stretch of the imagination. I just want to acknowledge that I understand why it's annoying to ask. I also believe that asking can be part of the one very minor part of the solution, or at least moving toward, a better share of the mental load. And part of that is because, I talk about something in my book called piling on of precedence, which is basically how I liken women. I don't know if they have Bounty in the UK, but like Bounty quicker picker uppers, which are paper towels. I say women are like that because we're super absorbent. We're just like soaking things up. But early on in our relationship, we sort of soak up all of these tasks without any conversation, without any discussion or negotiation. And so then over time, we basically own them. Like in the beginning, our partners probably notice it and they thank us and they appreciate it. You're the best, babe. What would I do without you? Over time, they are relying on us to handle it because we've handled it before. And now they're not even aware of it. It's become invisible. All this stuff piles on for a very long time. Kids enter the picture, responsibilities explode overnight, and all of a sudden we kind of reach our tipping point. When we are like, we shouldn't have to ask, we have to also acknowledge the probable reality, which is that we've been doing it all in the dark. I'm not saying this is our fault, and I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just calling out a common pattern, which is that we've probably been doing it all on our own without talking about it with them for a very long time, to the point where like they really aren't that aware of it. They've removed it from their thoughts. And so asking, I like to think of it, or almost like rebrand it, as inviting them back into participation. Asking should move them along the continuum of being passive to being a more active participant in the home. So it's their responsibility. This will require probably a deeper conversation with them, which we can talk about that, but it's going to require them to absorb the information when they've been asked, so that you're not asking every time, fill the water bottles, do put this in the diaper bag, but rather every time they're being asked, they're thinking, okay, this is information that I'm going to hold on to, that I'm going to remember, that helps me step into confident and competent initiative taking down the road. So I think of asking as a tool to help move our partner back up that continuum.
What other tools would you recommend if that's one piece to the puzzle?
Something that I started doing in my relationship as an experiment, I started years ago, just like randomly I'll do this. I'll do experiments on my husband to see if I can change the relationship without actually him knowing, and by just changing my own behavior. So I started narrating more involved tasks out loud to him. So not just basic stuff, not like a resentful muttering, but like hey, it sounds like this. So our son plays baseball. So I'd say, hey, babe, I wanted you to know I signed Roy up for baseball. I filled out the forms. I uploaded his birth certificate. I put in all the pediatrician information. It's like a whole ordeal to sign kids up for stuff these days. I paid the fees and I downloaded 2 apps. You need to get these apps too, but I wanted you to know it's handled. And the purpose of this is that, number one, I just took something that he never knew was like that involved, and I just made every single step visible to him. So I didn't do it in the dark. I made it visible. Now he knows. It's also an opportunity then, and every time I would do this, for him to appreciate my doing. So then he would say, oh my gosh, thanks, babe. I'm glad that's taken care of. What are the apps? I got it, type of thing. So he's able to express appreciation to me for what I did. So what this also helps, because a lot of times as women, we might not mind doing that in the moment. We're like, whatever, I signed him up for baseball. But like later that day or later in the week, as things pile up and we're like, nobody appreciates me, that might be something we resent. And so I have protected our relationship and myself from developing resentment. What's happened over time with me doing this is that he has started narrating stuff too, without me ever telling him I was doing it. He'll narrate the stuff he does to add value to our family. So it's normalized this mutual exchange of sharing how we add value to our family and also free-flowing appreciation, and not the sort of competition or tit for tat.
I think, just thinking of my own relationship and experiences there, and you're so right, there's so many times in the moment I genuinely am quite happy to do something, and it's later on in the day when I start feeling a bit tapped out and a bit overrun and overwhelmed by the fact that there's been so many things to do, that the resentment creeps in. And that's often when I would snap at my husband. And I would sometimes say, it's not even that I mind doing the tasks. It's almost the lack of appreciation on your behalf, or lack of acknowledgement for what I've done. You just think that I've, just taken care of the kids. And it makes it seem insignificant. And I need to feel valued for the 1,001 components that allowed me to take care of the kids. So I love the way you've put that, because I think a lot of the time, I know my husband, certainly in the early days, would say that to me, that he just didn't know. He just didn't realize what went into it. And he didn't realize what was bothering me. And I was getting frustrated. But I guess also there was a piece of that sat with me, that I hadn't disclosed all of that information. I was being a bit of a martyr and getting on with it quietly, and then being really disgruntled that it wasn't being acknowledged.
And it's frustrating. I realize it's like both and, it's frustrating for women to be like, oh, great, now I got to explain what I do. And, they sort of like, that's more work for me. And I guess I just think of the mental load and how we navigate it in our relationship as playing long ball. This is not a quick fix. It takes time. Takes changing the way you've probably been operating in your relationship for many, many years, changing that, doing things a little bit differently, but taking a little extra time to speak out or to narrate or to offer meaningful appreciation. I mean, it's life-changing. It is life-changing when you're existing in a relationship with your partner and you feel seen, you feel valued, you feel like they understand what it's like to be you and how meaningful what you do for the family is to everyone. It builds you up. And so I think this is work worth investing in and sort of pushing through. The second thing I'll just say is, the appreciation piece is massive. I will never stop saying this because it's not commonly talked about when it comes to the mental load. But when I collected that data on the mental load, I asked women, what do you want most from your partner when it comes to this area, to the mental load in your relationship? And you would think it would be, I want it to be, equal, or I want 50-50 or whatever. The first thing they wanted was more initiative taking, which makes sense to me. And the second thing they wanted was more appreciation. And I think women are oftentimes very happy to just be loving their family and care. It feels good to take care of your family. It does. It doesn't feel good to do it though, when it feels like nobody cares. And so much of our day-to-day is really about thinking about, worrying about, or putting physical effort into the care for somebody else. To live so much of our lives for others and to not have that appreciated is painful. And so I think this appreciation piece is really a big one when it comes to feeling better in our relationship around this topic.
I was very keen, as was my husband, to kind of put this sense of valued and appreciation into the relationship that we were holding with the kids. And we were putting all this work into developing that relationship and learning to sort of validate their feelings and everything. And then it's like the realization hit that if we only applied everything that we're learning with the kids to each other, it was a bit of an eureka moment, that it was like, it has the same impact, that we feel valued and that we feel appreciated so much more. And it feels good just in the same way that we wanted to create that in our relationship with the kids?
I mean, we're all just bigger kids in many ways. I know, I feel like even sometimes when, our kids were a bit younger and they were like having a tantrum, and I didn't always handle it the best. And sometimes I did great and sometimes I didn't. But something that always helped me was to just reflect on my own tantrums. We are constantly having these moments as adults where we're dysregulated or frustrated, we're hungry or tired. And, there's so many things that we think about, that we accommodate, that we put effort into for our children, that we need to do for ourselves. And, my first book, one of my main sort of like the main premise of the whole book is we have to learn to mother ourselves like we mother our kids. But also, we need to like take care of our partnership in the same way we take care of our kids. And the stronger we are as a couple, the more solid we are, the better home life we create for our children. So it's very important.
And I mean, just touching on that about mothering ourselves, why do you think so many women do struggle to say that they're struggling? Why do they find that hard to admit?
I think that we enter into motherhood with a whole set of expectations that often we never actually have explored or even acknowledged, but they affect us in how we feel about ourselves in motherhood. I had a mom who was like the super mom of the 80s, 90s kind of mom, where she just did everything, involved in everything, attended every event, coached every team, room mom for every class. And she did not work outside of the home. She was a full-on stay-at-home mom. And so I really didn't even think about it, but then I just took all of that experience and I basically have a template inside of me that was like, that's the type of mom that I'll be, never actually really acknowledging that directly, but just lived in me. And because we're sort of learning how to be moms, learning how to be dads, as throughout our entire life, we're absorbing information about that. And so I took that same template, I applied it to myself, and that was a standard that I held myself to. And this was a big reason why I felt like I was constantly failing in motherhood, is that my life didn't look like hers. My husband travels every week for work. Like, I don't have a husband home every night. I was working. I have a picture of me with a baby on my lap as I'm on my computer doing work. My life was different, and my expectations and standards had to adjust based on the reality of my life. And so I think there's many reasons, but I do think that's one reason why women really have a hard time asking for help or have a hard time asserting their needs, is that we have these standards we hold ourselves to that are not realistic. And then we feel like if we violate those, it means we're less than as a mom. And it's just not true. We probably just need to adjust our standards.
So often resentment builds up quietly in long-term relationships, certainly from the early parenting journey. What are some of the early signs then that it might be happening in your relationship?
Everything they do bothers you. It's that just, they're just rubbing me the wrong way. It's a telltale sign is when you're continually jumping to conclusions about your partner that are the most negative interpretation of them. So all the conclusions you're jumping to are like seeing them in the worst light. Lack of physical attraction, lack of feelings of love. A lot of times people get really concerned when they're like, I don't even know if I love them anymore. It's pretty normal for that to fluctuate in relationships. But when you're to the point where you can't tap into that at all, or you don't even like them, that's a sure sign there's probably some deep resentment going on. I think those are some of the biggest signs.
And in your book, you talk about the invisible labor, not just like the chores, but the emotional and the mental labor. So just answer quickly, why is it so easy for this work to go unnoticed? Why is that so common?
The invisibility piece is the big one. It sort of goes back to what I said about the piling on of precedents. We continue to do this into parenthood and throughout our relationship. I've talked to couples who've been married 50, 60 years, and the women will be like, I've been doing this forever. It's part of it is it continues to remain in the dark. We aren't able potentially to have the conversation with our partner. A lot of times talking about the mental load gets shut down because maybe they're defensive, dismissive. They don't understand it. So we tend to give up over time. We get discouraged. We'll just sort of retreat inward and we'll just suck it up and be a bit unhappy. And so we keep on doing the things. We keep on handling all the stuff that's invisible. And it doesn't find its way out into the open to really be understood and to be shared. I think another thing is that sometimes, and this is unpopular to say, with the emotional labor especially, I think women sometimes struggle to trust that their partners will sort of do the same level of emotional labor that they do, that they'll calculate things in the same way, that they'll be as thorough. And so we don't trust handing it off to them. And so we continue to hold it, but then also we continue to be very burdened by it. And so that also, I think, is a reason why.
Do you have any small changes that you believe then that every couple should make to feel more like a team in the chaos of parenting?
I think one of the biggest is just even the way that you talk about the mental load. This was a big one for my husband and I, and it's really how I begin my book, which is that you have to name the mental load as the shared enemy in your relationship. So part of the reason why I believe conversations with partners don't go well is because women come to the table, understandably so, beyond overwhelmed, burned out, frustrated by this, with some anger a lot of times, which again makes sense. And partners immediately go on the defensive. They try to prove them wrong. You just have too high of expectations. I'm doing enough. What do you expect of me? Of course, you got more, here you are criticizing me again. What did I do now? All these sort of things that really shut down the conversation. And I think that if we approached it instead as saying, listen, you probably notice that I'm tense. You probably notice that I'm overwhelmed. I want to talk about what's going on. And it's something called the mental load, or you can use whatever language you want to. I have a script in my book. It's basically the demands of modern family life. And they're absolutely never ending. They're relentless. You finish the laundry, there's another load right there that needs to be done again. It doesn't end. And we never talked about how we manage all of these parts of our life. And right now it's feeling like I am carrying quite a bit of it, and it's affecting how I show up for our family. It's affecting how I just show up as a person in our relationship. And so I want to talk about how you and I as a team can navigate the relentlessness of modern family life together in a way that feels good to both of us. So we enjoy our family. So we enjoy being married. So we enjoy this life that we were given, because it's not going anywhere. The mental load, we can find our systems and all of the tips and the tricks, but the reality is it's going to keep coming up. And so we have to learn how to navigate it without every time I bring something up, you feel like I'm attacking you, or we spiral into this conversation that ends up becoming an argument. We have to learn how to tackle this together.
I think you speak in the book, don't you, about how with the mental load and the to-do list, there's the one and done challenges and the treadmill tasks. And I think that's one of the things that we all suffer as women, is that it's just a constant treadmill of it's never done. The minute you get the washing done, and if you ever have an hour or two where you feel like it's all done, the kids come home and empty the school bags with the PE kit, the after football club stuff. And you just feel like it's never ending. You never get that satisfaction of feeling like job done. And they're the challenges that we really need that help and support with, because that's what can really weigh us down.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, on the one hand, yes, absolutely, we need that support. And we need for your partners coming home and they're sitting down on the couch and you're running around carrying baskets of laundry and doing the dishes and making dinner, like, hello, this is not okay. This is a shared time if you're coming in from work and I've been home or something, for example, this is a shared time where we need to figure out what everybody's time and energy looks like. And we need to be a team and support one another here, I think. And then on the other side, I will never forget this one weekend was just, this happens all the time, but it just was like so obvious to me, where I think I did laundry for 3 hours and then I cleaned the kitchen. I probably spent 2 hours because, once the kitchen's clean, it gets dirty and you got to clean it again. I could spend all day cooking and then cleaning and then cooking again. And so I spent like my whole day. Yeah. And then they want a snack and you're like, then you don't want to give them a bar because you're like, that's for the travel snacks, but then you're just so done with making snacks. So, but I spent all day basically on these treadmill tasks. And my husband spent all day doing our finances. I think it was tax season. He was like doing that. He was handling, we have a rental property. He was handling that stuff. He was handling some insurance issues. I mean, he spent the whole day working for our family too. I went to bed that night and there was another load of dirty laundry that needed done. The kitchen was a disaster because we made dinner. And he wasn't done with the taxes. And I guess I'm not saying that to be discouraging, but to just say, the life that we live is just, it's never ending anyway. The solution isn't always just one of you needs to step up. That's part of it. And it look different degrees for different couples. But also there is sort of this acknowledgement that we all need to make, which is that life is busy. We have a lot of demands on our plates, especially if both people are working. Sports and extracurriculars and having to be on our phones to navigate all things. Anything organized these days is on an app on our phones. There's this pressure to be productive. There's comparison culture. It's gone absolutely bananas. So acknowledging also like, babe, this is crazy. Looking at your partner like, this is wild. We worked our butts off all day and it's still never ending. Can we just be in it together? Being in it together feels completely different than feeling like you're carrying it alone and you don't understand each other.
My husband and I actually often talk about how this chapter of life is the busiest we will probably ever be in, because we've got now an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, and it's just busy. My husband travels a lot for work, and we say that sometimes on those moments when we haven't had time to connect and we're feeling a bit frustrated because we want some time. We just kind of do look at each other and say, like, oh, it's just busy, and nobody's done anything wrong. We're all, like you say, working our butts off and we're trying really bloody hard to meet everybody's needs. But at times there's just not enough to go round. And that's okay, because we are trying our best and we're doing our best. And it's not always going to be like this. This is just a period of time, a chapter of life. And, from what everyone who comes out the other side says to me, you'll miss it when it's gone.
I know. Our kids are 12 and 9, almost 10. I already feel that. So yeah, it's actually much shorter than we all think. And then our time and our ability to sort of knock things out and be productive, it's just going to keep growing. So yeah, not to say that's the answer, but just also that's just the reality of this.
You don't know what else to give because everybody is genuinely doing their best. Like in the example you gave, you worked really hard that day and your husband worked really hard. Where else are you going to pull resources from? You have to sometimes just step back and go, do you know what? There is just too much to do. Well, I love that, Morgan. You've given us so much to think about. I really love your 2 books. I've read them and I feel they are so relatable. You give so much of your own lived experience. And I think the way you speak about that makes any woman really feel heard and listened to, because you really are. I felt like you were in my head of a lot of the things I've been through myself. So I feel your kind of words of wisdom there on mental load and the emotional toll of that are what so many women need to hear. So thank you for showing up on the podcast and sharing that with my listeners today.
Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure to be here.